believe we will have a public comment period. I think, Amy, will you introduce?
Yes, so good morning. And I have allergies, so excuse me. Please be reminded that this is a public meeting and that it is being recorded. I have just started the recording. We have added a public comment period to the agenda for those from the public who wish to speak. And to ensure that everyone has an opportunity, comments will be limited to 3 minutes. I see only 2 members of the public. If you wish to make a comment, please state your name. Does anyone wish to make a comment? Okay, that concludes the public comment period, and I'm going to turn it back over to you, Terry.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. And thank you all for joining. You would have received yesterday a copy of the draft red line 2022-2023 proposed QAP and the clean version, which is somewhat easier to read, as well as a cover memo that would be like serve as an executive summary, kind of walks through the specific changes that we're looking at in the QAP. So our hope is today to just make sure that we're comfortable with the proposed changes. If not, make some adjustments. And then there's a couple of topics that we definitely wanted to address as unclear as to which you would like to do. There's some options. I could share my screen if you'd like to see the red line, or if Masuda, were you planning to share? If you're not, I will.
I can share, yeah.
Okay, sure. If you've got the red line up, that would be great.
So, okay, where would you like me to?
Great. So if we could go right to, say, the threshold requirements, because this beginning part of the QAP, the governing authority, has not changed. Only the dates and citations may have changed, but there's nothing, no material changes. Just when we get to threshold requirements, I wanted to point out that there's revised language for applicants that are proposing preservation and those with 4% deals with respect to energy efficiency and sustainable design measures. Those are included as an appendix as well. I think it's Exhibit A2, and it has some general outline of expectations. To the best of your ability, you need to include specific energy efficiency or sustainable design measures. The other piece that's revised is replacing rehabilitation with preservation wherever it might have appeared in the threshold area, just to be consistent with the new classifications. Those are the basic changes to threshold. There is no other, we didn't add anything or relieve anything. Everything else is pretty much the same. Does anybody have any comments on threshold before we go to the section B, which is financial feasibility? Okay. So under financial feasibility, we have a caveat that CHFA may evaluate a proposed 9% application utilizing tax-exempt bonds and a 4% LIHTC financing scenario if that development appears to be viable and financially feasible using 4% instead of 9s. And I think that's an important consideration because sometimes, in particular, I think someone had brought up recently the point that if you're doing preservation, why don't you just use 4%? Sometimes preservation deals are very expensive, and that's why they need to come in as a 9%. But if they're not, and they can be evaluated as a 4%, then that's in our purview to do. Does anybody have any comments or want to discuss that piece of it? That's new. Okay. Additionally, under the preservation and new construction classification, we had discussed this last week, but we had a comment from one of our housing authorities wondering if where we have discussed substantial rehabilitation of existing occupied multifamily rental housing, should we limit that to those occupied multifamily rental housing developments that are currently subject to affordability restrictions? The concern was potentially from the requester. The concern was that perhaps market rate developments could come in for preservation in exchange for, affordability, which isn't a bad thing, but it does then introduce new competition for the housing authority deals that really need the preservation dollars. So this is for your discussion. Would you prefer we leave it as it is and it's broad, or that we introduce the limitation that it's affordable multifamily rental housing developments?
It's Tim. Terry, thanks. So I think from my perspective, and I'm curious as to what other people think. I mean, our responsibility is to help create affordable housing. And while I get the concern, the fact is that if we're, regardless of whether it's, a housing authority or anyone else, if our responsibility and our mission is to create affordable housing, then we should create the opportunities to actually do that. So, unless there is a reason, and there may be logical reasons, right, that I have not thought of why we should restrict, but on the surface, to me, it seems that regardless of whether it's a public or private, if you're creating affordable housing, that's our goal. So that's my quick thoughts around that. But I would be curious as to, I mean, has this been an issue in the past?
No.
Yeah, then I'm not sure why we're going to fix something that's not necessarily broken right now.
Okay. Thank you, Tim.
This is Kathy. I would echo Tim's comments, and what I thought about when I read that was, limiting the ability to potentially do affordable housing, in a suburban community. If you're renovating an existing development, you don't have to worry about zoning, which is a big issue, trying to get into new communities. So I think anything that would limit that opportunity is probably, not advisable.
Thank you, Kathy.
I would support both the comments of Tim and Kathy, and would also just flag that if we did make a change like that, it seems like we would be foregoing an opportunity to create new quality affordable housing at a more reasonable rate, right? It might be very, very expensive to rehab units in an existing housing authority property. We might be able to more cost effectively create new affordable housing through this type of opportunity where there's a new affordability component. So I don't think we would want to forego that opportunity.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on the matter? Does anyone disagree? Okay.
I would like to hear, and Terry, doesn't have to happen now, but I would like to hear, the dissenting side, right? I mean, clearly they brought this up for a reason. Again, doesn't need to happen now, but if we have an offline conversation or something, I'd be curious as to what the other thoughts are around not or restricting are.
Sure. Okay.
Terry, on the prior section, I didn't get my unmute off quickly enough.
Kathy, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I did have a question about what that process would be of suggesting somebody go for 4% versus the 9%. At what point would that happen, and what would the criteria be? I guess we probably just want to make sure that that was clear.
That's a good point. We know we would have to develop a process around it. Something I think we do currently if a development wasn't successful or wasn't going to be successful, I mean, we think we make every effort to ensure we can move a deal forward. So, and I could be misspeaking, Masuda, correct me if I'm wrong, but if a 9% deal isn't going to be rising to the, to the top, say it's just not going to score well enough, we would look at it to see if it could be achieved in a different way, if that deal could happen in a different way. So okay, so the 9% is not going to work. Maybe it could work as a hybrid, maybe it could work as a 4%. I think we like to try to find ways to get deals through the pipeline if they don't work with 9%. The idea of looking at deals as 4s, I think is important if you're opening preservation to, I'm sorry, if you're opening up the 9% applications and there are deals that maybe they don't need as much 9%, maybe they could do well with 4s, and then there's others that could benefit from the 9s that are a little bit farther down. It was just try to make
Yeah,
the resources stretch,
yeah,
and we would
yeah,
develop a process
yeah,
around.
and I completely agree with that.
Okay,
I
good.
guess how that decision is made. So is it possible that a project could score well as a 9%, but economically could really use 4% instead?
Oh, right, then what do you do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mark, do you have any thoughts on how this has worked in other states?
The state where it has happened the most, to my knowledge, is Michigan, and but I don't know the specifics of how they make the cutoff. I know that it occurs, and so that would be something that we could find out. But the I don't, but there would be a limit on how much anyone could know far in advance about where that cutoff line would be. I mean, there's obvious extremes. I mean, if it's a 300 unit project with rent assistance, then yeah, that's a bond deal. Whereas if it's a 48 unit in the middle of nowhere, with no rent assistance, no other kind of help, then that's a 9% deal. But
Yeah.
there's most properties are in between, and where that feasibility line breaks is one of the big things that's going to affect it, that I'm sure some of you know much better than me, is interest rates not only have nowhere to go but up, but apparently they are going to go up, or at least that's the best guess. Of course, nobody knows, or at least anyone who does know is a bazillionaire and not part of our world. And so but that would make a huge difference. As those go up, deals become less and less possible to be bond deals. And so it's really almost like a game time decision as to when calling an audible effectively. But if there were to be a need to find out more about how it has operated elsewhere, the place to start would be Michigan. And Chad Benson runs their program, and he's a very nice, accessible person who's been there for a long time, so he could probably talk about that.
That's a good point. I know Chad, I can definitely call and find how did they develop the strategy and what is their process, and do a little more exploring.
I know in Illinois, every 9% deal went through a pre-application process,
Yeah.
and also had to receive a letter that it wouldn't work as a 4%. So, basically it had to be like pre-approved in a way. So we could talk to them as well about that.
Right,
Nandita,
and-
who issued the letter?
The Illinois Housing Development Authority did.
Yep.
Yeah, both of those two states have very sophisticated operations. Michigan has a unique way that they issue bonds, and that I don't fully understand. And Illinois has they hired a fella, Andrew, from, I think it was City, something like that. And so and Nandini can obviously describe this much better than me, but they're as good or better than any bank in the state in doing that kind of lending work.
The pre-app process might make it very useful.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah.
We can do some research, but that's a good question.
Okay, and we'll talk more about that. I think, yeah, the research and the pre-app process together, that might be key. Okay. So moving then to, what do we have next here? Okay, so the the priority classifications that we had under the preservation classification priority ranking, I think we had discussed that last time and were pretty comfortable with where we landed. There was a question about whether we should introduce new language, not necessarily new, but a consideration of high cost areas. So when we're looking at the preservation classification priority rankings, and we have the list, I think it's on the next page, Masuda. Do we want to include anything that talks about rehab work that's proposed in a development that's located in a high cost area? And if so, where in this prioritization would we want to put that? So this is for your discussion to consider.
How does the priority ranking work? So, and how does it relate to the points?
So preservation applications would not be scored. So they're not going to come in for points. They're just going to apply and be prioritized.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. And the top prioritization we had was the scope of the rehab work. How badly did this deal need to be done? And then those developments that are identified by a municipality or a locality as being in need of rehab for their community revitalization purposes. Those developments that have the greatest project-based rental assistance. Although maybe that, I don't know, if they were at risk at losing that. Maybe that's where, if you were going to introduce the high cost area, that might be the spot to do it. But the main prioritization is the cost and the community revitalization component. After that, it's how many project-based rental assistance units, how many, or how much energy efficiency you're contemplating completing with your development. Are you resyndicating? Because we don't want to lose these deals that are approaching the end of their lifespan. And then the owner's experience with light tech properties.
So Terry, do you need a motion or a proposal? or-
I just wondered if you wanted to think about high cost areas as a priority.
So Terry, one thing that sorry.
Go ahead.
One of the items that we talked before was about taking prioritization on the project-based rental assistance.
Mhm.
Actually, you have rental assistance. You can do the 4% deals.
Right.
And that's what we're doing a lot of those right now, 4%, because the state's putting some money and then 4%. And the lending capacity that brings those Section 8 vouchers. So I would think that we don't want to put this in the 9%.
That makes sense. Yeah, especially after we just had that conversation and I was thinking, we don't really need, those are the ones that could go for 4s.
Yep, exactly.
We'll take that out.
Thank you.
Is
So
there
If we're
any,
taking that out, Terry, I think your proposal that then the new number 3 could be as described, that would be a prioritization on units in particularly high cost areas. I think that's where you were going with that. If so, that seems very sensible, at least to me.
okay. And as a concept, it seems ideal. But then the question becomes, how are we going to define high cost areas? And we could do a little bit of thinking on that, but there might be, we might want to be very clear on what that means, because so that
That is gonna be difficult. I wouldn't be that specific actually, as a priority for high cost area, because you got it. You are rehabilitating if there is a housing authority, if there is a re-syndication, those are priorities, right? Because we want to preserve what we have.
What about conversion to market? Is that something that would capture the concern? Because high cost areas, if they converted to market, that would be a loss, right? Is that something that,
right.
So you're talking about risk to lose those affordable units?
yeah. I mean, that's not really in here anywhere. You know what I mean?
Or another thought, I don't know if this is exactly the same, but another thought might be to prioritize preservation in areas that have particularly low percentages of currently available affordable housing.
Yeah, so I think, Nandini, you're talking about, let's say there is a market, not an affordable housing building that wants to sell and wanted to and preserve it for affordable housing, something like that, a transaction that from market can become affordable.
Or that you have an affordable component or, building that's at risk of converting to market because it's in a very, high cost, or an area with a robust economy and people want to live there and there's a lot of demand, and, units like that could convert. And so wouldn't you want to preserve it within the LIHTC program if you had the opportunity to do so?
Yeah. So that will go with not the tax credit, but other affordable units that have accomplished their time, but they're not tax credits. That's just, let's say, stay money that has a 50-year.
Why couldn't it be tax credits though? Maybe I'm missing.
Oh no, because you have there the ones that you are syndicating.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. Gotcha.
Maybe that's a place to put it, is to suggest that if a developer, the priority could be expanded to say that development seeking resyndication of prior allocation of credits or at risk of losing affordability, and that might capture it.
Yep, I think so.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Carrie, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
Are we going to let developers pick the classification, or are we assigning it?
No, I think they come in with their application under either new construction or preservation.
What
And
if
this
they pick the wrong one?
What if they,
I mean, what if they pick one that was not appropriate for what they're doing?
well, we've defined it. Okay, so it's got to be preservation is existing occupied multifamily housing. Okay, everything else is new construction. So we might want to also be clear that if you're doing preservation, you're working on a deal that has existing occupied multifamily housing, and you have property next door that's adjacent that you're going to build a new building on, that we might want to suggest if you are creating 50% or more units, your new construction or something along those lines, so that it's clear if there's a blend of rehab and new construction, which one they should apply under. I think that's where it will come into play, just making sure people understand. And when we have a public comment period, it'll give developers a chance to ask all these questions and to, help us to describe exactly what we're talking about. So I think, to your point, that'll be an important consideration. Where are they applying?
Can I just ask?
Oh, I'm sorry, Tim.
No, go ahead, Lisa.
Just returning to the thought that I had thrown out there in tandem with the idea that I think we've resolved from Nandini's perspective. Should we say explicitly here that there's also priority for preservation of units that are in areas with a very low percentage of current affordable housing? Because when we think about it, if we lose units in an area where there's already a shortage, that seems like, you know, we should be looking really hard at how to preserve what we have, right, in areas that are already on the low end. But what I can't quite wrap my mind around is whether we're already as effectively doing that here. And if so, that's fine. If not, I would propose that we think hard about whether that needs to also be an explicit priority.
Okay. I think,
But aren't we kind of getting that already with the risk of loss of units through a expiration of affordability or, you know, whatever period? Because if it's happening in an area where there's already little affordable housing, you're kind of, it's happening one way or the other through one of the expiration of one of these periods of affordability, right? So you would think we're capturing it.
That's true, Nandini, except that I'm very mindful of the fact that, at least, I'm sorry Kylie isn't here, but at least according to the research that the partnership has put out, we are about to come up against a very large volume of expirations of properties. So there is going to be competition among properties that are all coming up against that. So I don't know. And maybe there's another way that that's dealt with here. I can't see it, but maybe the staff also have a perspective on that. But I don't know if we're really prioritizing that, and it seems like it might be a missed opportunity.
You want to think about that?
Terry, a comment on number 2, and I hear in Lisa, and I think that yes, we do need to think about that. I don't know how, but on number 2, just wanted to, I don't like the part of cited municipality, because that means that the municipality is going to, or how I understand is that the municipality have to design or assign that site for rehabilitation. Many times the municipalities are not part of the neighborhood revitalization, and it's not their priorities, depends on who is in office. But there are organizations that are doing rehabilitation and neighborhood work. So I will probably take out the municipality, cited by municipality, but a comprehensive rehabilitation plan. There are foundations that are doing that. In Waterbury, the Harold Wester Smith Foundation is driving that. It wasn't by the city.
okay. Okay, and that's also would pick up like the COGS and the NRZ.
All the neighborhoods, yes, the NRCs, they're not directed by the city, by the municipality. So we can just reward that.
Okay, we'll take out that municipality language and just leave it broad.
Yeah.
And to Lisa's point about the geography, do you want us to propose some language that we could include that gets to the point that we could share? I think I understand the risk of losing affordability in areas that already have too little affordable housing. So that if you're interested in including that as one of the priorities, we could certainly come up with some language that we could send around very quickly by email. Let's say everybody could say yes or no, weigh in and change it if they'd like.
I would be in favor of that, Terry, but I'd be interested to hear from others. But it seems like something that would be worthwhile to me.
Sure, I'm not opposed. Does anybody have any thoughts on what exactly how to express that? Okay.
You know,
We'll give-
Terry, it could even be, for areas with less than 10% affordable housing, if you wanted something that was very, cut and dried.
Oh, tying it to like the opportunity characteristics?
Or just, yeah.
Okay. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense to tie it to the opportunity characteristics. I mean, that's
Okay.
easy to
Yeah.
assess.
All right. We'll propose something to share so that we can move forward. All right, so the next area of discussion is the new construction classification, which is the section that contains the competitive points ranking system. In our last discussion, we were aware that the rental affordability needed to have some adjustment to remind us that, or it needs to reflect our priorities in the strategic plan. And we've addressed that with a couple of new categories and some strengthening of points. What's in the QAP at this moment is 112 points. Rental affordability remains in the same rank as it was in prior years with 37 points. Financial efficiency has the 31. Local impact has 18. Opportunity characteristics and qualifications are unchanged with 15 and 11 each. We did remove the points for SSHP developments because those are preservation. So they're going to be outside of the.
You're on mute, Terry.
Oh, I just, I don't know how I did that. I'm so sorry. Did you hear anything I just said? Probably not. Okay, so the new construction classification points are on the next page. I just summarized, all I was doing was summarizing the change in the points.
Yeah, you got to the SSHP.
Okay, great. Then
Yeah.
I don't know how I muted myself. I apologize for that. All right, so then if you go to the next page, Masuda, the points in this section with the tiebreaker is really no different. So if we go to the next page that starts with the rental affordability, I just wanted to introduce you to some of the new points that are proposed and get your opinions and take on that. Let's see where we are. Okay. The supportive housing points, I think that they're unchanged. The next two sections were beefed up a little bit. Households at or below 30% AMI and households between 30 and 50 each have an additional point allocated to them. And then there are some new, after the mixed income housing stays the same, there on the next page, there are some new points items. We've taken out the items that related to preservation and introduced points for addressing systemic disparities. So we are using the marketing plan as a tool. So we're asking developments to submit an affirmative fair housing marketing plan that addresses systemic disparities, and that includes a plan that will be implemented to generate leads and reach the population that's been historically marginalized. We're hopeful that the marketing efforts and their implementation strategy will include reporting tools, because that's what we will need to evaluate in an ongoing way. So in its totality, we'll get the plan, points will be awarded, and then ongoing, we'll be able to monitor based on the reporting that they've proposed. So the criteria to base those 2 points of an award is the extent that they are increasing diversity and bridging differences among all residents, and regardless of race, disability, social, economic, educational, or cultural background, and provide integrated social, educational, and recreational experiences, and the extent to which the development provides outreach and incentives to attract the individuals and families from historically marginalized racial and ethnic groups and immigrants, as well as those least likely to apply. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. This is new. We've looked nationwide. There isn't any QAP yet that introduces this concept, although it's under study in a lot of areas. Many people interested in this topic. Chicago has just done a study, but they haven't yet introduced it to their QAP. It's something that is in our strategic plan and is important. So we're hopeful that this might be a way to start the conversation. If you have comments and feedback, would really appreciate it.
Hey, can I ask a question?
Sure.
What does it mean to, quote, provide integrated social, educational, and recreational experiences? What are we trying to get at?
So we were looking for, we had a whole list of things, and this is what we condensed it to, but we were thinking about things like providing, mechanisms for people to thrive. So it would be educational opportunities, job training, access to fresh food, having daycare on site or in close proximity, having relationships with neighborhood organizations that could bring services to, not necessarily social services, but services in general that would benefit any resident, providing a host of access to whatever might be, let's say, enriching. So maybe it's kids after school programs, or there's a pool, or there's a gym, or, we were trying to, when I say, Lisa, we had a list, we had this ginormous list, and we're trying to think of what does it mean to be, part of a community and thriving and have all of this available to everyone. And then we culled it down to that little phrase, which would probably need to be further expanded in the guidelines so people would know what we were talking about and the things that we're trying to get to.
So couple of questions. I mean, it's great to try to incorporate it. I just see some challenges to try to implement it. So you give them 2 points because they have a fair housing plan, the developers, right? But a fair housing plan is just a plan. So how do we monitor that? And so that's on the policy issue, right? How do we monitor and how do we make sure that those are implemented? On the other side, on the development side and property management, when I was a developer and I built in high opportunity areas, the challenge is to get to those groups, the minority groups that do not want to live there. Sometimes even giving them incentive will stay and then come back to the city because Guilford is not the same as New Haven. So I'm just looking at for a practical aspect. When you're trying to implement it and penalize people, sometimes it's not that they're not doing the right, some perhaps are not doing the right thing, but some other ones, they really tried, but it's very difficult on a tax credit unit that you have to have it occupied, right? So maybe it's some of the units that you don't have deadlines where you have to have those units occupied and you don't have to have the 30 days and 60 days vacancy because you're trying to bring a minority person. So that I think is going to be a little more difficult to implement it. I mean, it's great that we have it in the QAP. Perhaps the first year I could not give points. I will, or you couldn't penalize people, but have it there so that they can they can be some way of making sure that they also get the support to be able to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. It's just it's such a big thing to put it in for compliance. I don't know. I mean, Kathy, you might have other experience, but that has been my experience.
Yeah, I guess my first thought was, what would that report look like? And I mean, the other thing to keep in mind is that we're talking about housing developers. You know, I don't know that we're necessarily in the business of creating cultural and recreational opportunities. You know, I mean, it just feels like a lot. You know, and how do you actually build that? I mean, you're not going to you can't build a gym and a pool for a 50-unit LIHTC project. I mean, how do you pay for all of that? I guess, you know, while I feel like the intent is worthy, I'm not sure how it could be implemented.
Hi, so I'll chime in, and I'm really glad that Selah and Kathy went first, and I'll be a little more, you know, this isn't fluff, it's real, right? But this seems more like a goal than something that should be in the middle of a QAP. I mean, I'd like to see this on a cover letter or an executive summary or something, to say, look, this is what we're kind of striving for. I'm more of a keep it simple, right? Here's what we're trying to accomplish. Let's get it done. Let's make sure that we have goals. We're all kind of fighting for the same thing. But you know, I'm not a developer. I didn't come from the same side as Selah, but I just, you know, it just seems like becomes a much harder lift when you're already trying to develop housing to add all these other things in and make it all fit into this box.
That said, the second point, the extent to which the proposed development provides outreach and incentives to attract as residents, individuals and families from historically marginalized, that seems, at least to me, that seems like a really good place for us to focus.
And most of the projects that do have DOH money, they have to do these plans. They have to do the fair housing, and they have to submit that, and they have to reach out to minority groups, and they have to have their whole marketing plan where they identify which minority groups. So as I said, it's just a little difficult to put it in a QAP where you're talking about transactions, than to really get to the policy issues. Like DOH has that particular area, right? So they do need to demonstrate all these other things.
So it sounds like then, yes, it's a policy goal. Yes, it's a priority for us, but it's difficult to use it as a points item, even though points drive behavior, because it's not as clearly articulated as something as how many units of X do you have? So this might not be the mechanism. Using the affirmative fair marketing plan, and that people are required to do anyway, and awarding a couple points, maybe just like throwaway points, if we're saying this is what we want you to do, and this is a way of communicating it. If alternatively, to Tim's point, maybe this is just a piece of this type of concept is just a piece of communication that prefaces the work that we do in any of our housing developments, not just the 9% round, but in everything that we do, so that it's clear this is the lens through which we're looking, and you need to be working on it.
Yeah, this is the vision of what you have for all the developments that you are funding. And this is encouragement, and it's how many tools we can give to developers and to nonprofits to be able to accomplish this goal, right? Is they keep working towards that. But no, on the structural and the finance piece, sometimes it's very difficult to get that piece in, and then how you penalize. Some people will go way beyond, and then you cannot prove that you did all that, right?
Right.
And if you didn't do it, it doesn't matter. I already got my points, and I already built the property. So who cares?
Right. We did think about the administrative burden we might be imposing on the developer and on asset management, to be frank, because somebody has to monitor all of this. if new reporting is required and how often does that occur? And then who's monitoring it and what happens when something slips? And yeah, so I mean, there's a whole host of things that go along with implementing and managing this. I'm fine with taking it out, putting it somewhere else, whatever you propose.
I think you should put it somewhere else. I mean, you've essentially, I mean, based on what you just said, you basically created a new job. I mean, this could be,
Yeah.
this could be a job in and of itself.
I know, right? Okay. All right. All right, so everybody's comfortable with that. We'll take this out as a points item and
Yeah.
we'll, figure where to include this language to preface the rest of all of our work.
Yep.
Okay. E is out. F is extended affordability commitment. This is also new, and this is about developments that are awarded points in the opportunity characteristics category. And if you could scroll down a little bit, I think, Masuda, then that we can see the whole thing. Yeah. Okay. So points that are awarded at least 6 points in the opportunity characteristics area, and that are also extending affordability by more than the, standard that we require to at least 50 years by virtue of using an ELIC, will receive a point for that. This is trying to get longer affordability in high cost, high opportunity areas.
Is this is 6 points high opportunity, or is it moderate? Or how there was the 5
I think,
scales?
yes, let me look at this. Let me look right now.
6 is moderate.
I think 6
Moderate.
might be the scale that we had proposed for the new opportunity area points. 8 is high, 9 is very high, 6 is moderate. So it's one of those 3: moderate, high, or very high.
So what would be a moderate like town? Can you, or it's census tract, so
I could tell you. I can open up I have a report. Find it. I'm sorry, just give me 1 second while I'm looking for it.
So there'd be sections of like towns of like Manchester.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, no, I just brought the map. So Bristol
Yeah.
has a number of moderate census tracts. Parts of Windsor and Bloomfield. So sort of like second ring suburbs.
so the question would be if the board's okay with that. So you'd be including moderate and higher as opposed to just high and very high. So that's just something to think about.
Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Or it's 1 point. It's not extremely rich, but it does get us longer affordability in areas that, we would think that we need it the most.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. All right. We beefed up the points for resident service coordinators. Everybody got the current 1 point for a resident service coordinator.
Yeah, and I think that's where maybe you can add a little bit of what you have in the other page, Terry, on
Okay.
what is the accomplishment of the resident coordinator, which is about providing support to the families and is attracting other residents and making that community more amenable to the residents.
Okay. That sounds good.
So yeah, make it a kind of a goal of that resident coordinator, not just to say, oh yeah, I have a site resident coordinator, but it's just, another staff that I have in property management assisting to recruit people, and that's it. But actually, what are those goals? If you have a resident coordinator, you can give them points.
Perfect. We have a guideline for resident service coordinators, and right now, there was one point for people who had at least 20 hours and they signed that acknowledgement that they received the guideline. Okay. And as I mentioned, everybody got that point. So we first increased it to 40 hours a week. So you should have somebody, if you have somebody on full-time or you have 2 part-time people and they're doing the work that needs to get done, you could earn 2 points. If you have, we still left that 1 point for 20 hours a week, but we added that there has to be a specific funding source for the coordinator's salary, benefits, and annual training. That's in both places too, because people weren't getting training. And a point was provided if they have a master's level degree. And then we would add, we could add a couple of points here for, specific articulated goals. And that would include the outreach and the integration of all in the community to be able to participate in the same kind of language that we had in the earlier section on integration and equitable housing.
Yeah, that is a more appropriate place.
Okay.
Can I just ask, so we're adding a point for someone who has a master's degree, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what if you had, that would assume that you've got somebody in mind for the job before you get the credits, right?
Or that you pledge to hire somebody with a master's degree. There's
Yeah.
plenty. There's a lot of
Actually,
candidates. Yeah.
Terry, and I'm looking at Tim, he's smiling about having a master's degree, but why not is you have a director. Sometimes organizations do have director of resident services, and that person might not have a master, but he might have a lot of experience, professional certificates, and years of working, and they're a director. So I just think that some people will have masters and they do have directors. Some people will have somebody with a master's degree and have a directorship position. So I would think more about a position if they have a leadership position in the organization.
Okay.
I don't know, Tim, is
Yeah.
that Kathy?
Well, I think you get into some like fair hiring kinds of issues. Someone could have a master's degree in, physics. Is that really going to make them a good resident services coordinator? I think even when you're hiring, you put ads in the paper or whatever for people, it's like, recommended but I don't know that you can not hire someone who's really qualified just because they don't have a master's degree.
I'll
And
tell you
then
why. Go ahead, Kathy. I'm sorry.
And I think if you're looking for someone like an MSW, is that the, but a lot of times that's what you need maybe for elderly, senior housing, but for family housing, I'm not sure that that's what you really need. If you had somebody who, was really good at sort of financial capability and that kind of stuff, I don't know that you want to get into something that specific. And the other thing too is that what if people don't work 40 hours a week? Like our organization, people work 37 and a half hours a week. So it might be like full-time versus, I think full-time versus
full-time,
part-time is defined by law, but
We could certainly use that language, but it sounds like you all don't like master's degree.
I do. I have a master's.
Yeah.
We like it. We all have master's degrees.
Right.
The challenge is, look, there are lots of smart people and capable people
Yeah.
who don't have master's degrees, and I just
Right.
think it, you know, to get an extra point to hire someone with a master's degree when you could have an outstanding person,
Right.
I think it's a little unfair.
Yeah.
We'll take it out. It's not a problem. It
Yeah.
was
And
introduced
I
just looking
Yeah,
for quality, looking for a way
Yeah.
to try to ensure that the resident service coordinator that was brought on board was someone with the skills.
yeah.
And really, that probably speaks more to experience than anything else. So
Yeah.
we'll just take that piece
Well,
out.
maybe the way to get at that is, and I haven't looked at the guidelines for resident service coordinators, but shouldn't it really be what the person produces? Is there a way to evaluate the effectiveness of that program versus, you know, the degree that the person, you know what I mean?
Right. Gotcha.
I mean, I have a master's degree. I don't think I'd be a very good resident services coordinator. I mean, so,
This was
you know,
supposed to be in a relevant discipline like an MSW. It wasn't,
Yeah.
didn't mean like, you know, I have an MBA. Okay. I'm not going to be
Yeah.
an RSC.
yeah,
But
yeah,
if you had an MSW, you would presumably have more experience and a deeper understanding of how to best serve the residents. But most often, the resident service coordinators are connecting the residents to services. They're not
Right.
directly providing
right,
services. So, which is,
exactly.
you know, which was a different thing too. So take out the master's degree and maybe just, and also take out the 20-hour, 40-hour and call it full-time, part-time.
Yeah,
We could also include some, you know, language about, you know, along the lines of the training and enrichment opportunities so that whoever is hired has ongoing ability to improve their, you know, their skills so they could best serve the population that's in the housing. Okay.
You know, the additional advantage at not having the master's degree requirement is that that can become a barrier to hiring people from that community. So it's, I think, really a good option that you've selected, Terry, to go rather the direction of supporting people, because I think we're seeing more and more that there's a real effectiveness if you're able to hire from within the community and provide the support so they have the skills and then can leverage their understanding of the community they come from, but provide those additional services. And that's not at all what's intended by putting a master's degree in place to make that harder, but it can have the effect of doing that.
Okay.
So that's a great compromise, I think, that you've proposed, Terry.
Okay, great. Okay, then the next new section we have is about project-based rental assistance. So there's two components. There's the first part is project-based vouchers that would be obtained from the local housing authority if there is a partnership with a local PHA, or maybe it is the PHA that's providing itself project-based vouchers for the development that it's proposing. And the second piece is developments getting project-based vouchers through the Connecticut 811 PRA program. And that's administered through DOH, and they have all the information there. We've been connecting people from the LIHTC program to the 811 administrators, but it's a way of saying, listen, we have a lot more and we want to get these into the developments. And so we're providing 4 points for either project-based vouchers from a housing authority or 4 points for project-based vouchers from CT 811. That application process, you know, the first is more of a relationship, you know, between the developer and the housing authorities. And the second is more of an outreach to DOH to say, you know, this is what we're proposing. Would you be interested in supporting my deal?
So, maybe Kathy, you can do a little more of this, but a couple of things. I think with the state, is more, I don't think we will be able to give you full commitments for
No,
an application.
yeah. I did talk to Michael rather extensively to come up with what could we possibly do. And they have what do they call it? And it's like a preliminary agreement to enter into a contract. It's like an expression of interest. And if they are willing to issue that, then they would be willing to follow through on it. But it's not that it's a pure commitment in the sense that you've got to, that would also trigger Davis-Bacon wages, and we don't want to go there. So it's more the letter of interest type of preliminary letter. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'll have to talk to Michael a little more about it, just on the commitment.
Okay, and then just let me know if this needs to be changed or what we should do with it. Okay.
I think my only-
What is it that we're trying to achieve by this?
So we have some, we're incentivizing a lot of very low and extremely low income unit production. And it would be helpful for many of these residents who might just be like at 26% AMI and they're in a 50% AMI unit to be able to access a voucher. So we've often encouraged, for a long time, we've encouraged developers to try to get some project-based rental assistance into the deal, if at all possible, to support the supportive housing units and the very low and extremely low income population in general. We've been fairly successful, but at the same time, only really with developers that are partnered with housing authorities, not with others. And because we have the 811 resource and we have the housing authorities that can partner, we had the recent development in Branford that had a relationship with New Haven, and they were able to, get project-based vouchers into the Branford, which was fabulous. And, I think the first of its kind in the state. We were trying to incentivize more of that creativity.
I think my only, and I haven't, can't necessarily put my head around this right now, but there are two kind of thoughts that came to my mind. One is, how does this impact kind of mixed income developments? What is the impact on it, particularly since I think there's a lot of promotion in terms of mixed income communities. And then secondly, I know some communities like, Stanford as an example, they have developments where a developer can come in, he builds a high rise, he decides he doesn't want to put affordable units into his building, but then he has to give, $1 million or whatever it is to the housing authority to create affordable housing somewhere else. And so, I'm just throwing it out there because I'm not sure how this impacts that, or if it does at all. But it's just when I look at it, it just seems like there might be some connection or potentially negative impact. That's just something to think about.
Okay. It shouldn't impact the mixed income developments. It's just supporting the residents on the low end. But what we've seen in the last few years anyway, from when I look at the types of units that are created, for every unit at the 25% AMI, there's a unit at the 100% AMI or 120. So they're internally subsidizing the lowest income with the highest income, which is great. It would only help both the resident and the property to have project-based vouchers supporting those under the 50% level, particularly because we hear from residents who are struggling to, let me put it this way. If you can't quite afford the 80% rent, there's nothing you can do about that. you have to live somewhere else. But if you can't quite afford the 50% rent, you could get a subsidy, a project-based subsidy to support you there.
Yep.
In which case, it only helps the people who are living there, and the difference in rent helps the developer. So there's some kind of an incentive for them to do
Yeah,
it.
no, look, Terry, you could be 100% right on that. I think
We could-
once we put this out, you'll have the developers come back and say, hey, this is, what will happen here. It'll make it
Okay.
easier for
Yeah.
us.
I'm making some notes here because I'm gonna
Yeah.
just do some research and see what we could figure
Yeah.
out.
On the other hand, Terry, is opportunity. This is basically more points for the housing authorities and the big developers that partner with the housing authorities, because they're doing these deals with the vouchers, and they have the opportunity with the RAD to do this. So you leave the smaller developers, the nonprofit developers that do not do this type of work without those points. So basically, you're incentivizing a different type of developments.
Yeah. Because the issue, I don't think the issue is that you need to incentivize people to get rental subsidies. I think most developers would prefer to have rental subsidies in their
Yes.
project,
Right.
so it's not like you're trying to encourage someone to go find rental subsidies. The problem is that there aren't lots of rental subsidies available. So
I would
And it
definitely
feels-
agree that every developer would say that having rental subsidies in their property is a benefit, and it's one of the great ways that agencies and owners are aligned in their
Yeah.
interests. But the way I would characterize this incentive is for developers to go through the process to get it, because that is not always easy. And what I think will happen if this gets enacted as written or close to as written is, if a developer sees a path to get the project-based assistance that's reasonable, getting these points will basically push them over it'll be the tipping point for them to go and make that effort. But the rest of them are going to pick the 811. And I think I think it's probably true that it maybe that word firm needs to only apply to the converting of Section 8 vouchers, because with 811, to me, what is point worthy is for the owner or the developer and then eventual owner to say, if DOH wants us to have a Section 811 contract, we will take it. And if they refer folks to us under that contract, we will, we'll house them, presuming they meet the screening criteria. And so it's less about having that all figured out, but more the developer being willing to be part of 811 implementation, so that when DOH goes to them and says, all right, we got this, we got the rack, time for you to sign up, the answer is yes. They have to say yes.
Terry, I want to go back to something Salah said, right, which is about the housing authorities. Does this unfairly advantage maybe the housing authorities and the developers working with them versus the not-for-profits? And again, I don't know I'm asking the question. I don't know the answer, but if you've got a housing authority that's also a very good has a very, very good development arm, or they're working with a for-profit developer. I mean, does this give them an advantage that others don't have?
And I would say yes, because the nonprofits, I mean, it's not that like the nonprofits or other smaller developers don't go after the Section 8, as Kathy said. It's just difficult to get them, because most of the times housing authorities partner with the big developers where they already commit their vouchers to those. So that's the unfair part of the other nonprofit developers. So you're gonna, the more Section 811 is an option for everybody, that usually everybody could access those, and we have limited of those. It's not like we have a significant amount, and they come in a year, so we don't have all of them at one point. So we have different time frame. So if you want to incentivize on the A11, but I will probably reduce the points.
Okay. Do you want to,
Just because the A11 will be up to anybody, any of the developers that wanted to apply for it.
And so if it's the same points for 811 or project-based assistance, and all you're doing for 811 is saying you're willing to accept it if DOH wants, which that second part may need to have some revisions, then I don't see any advantage to housing authority connections really at all. If anything, they're less advantaged because they have to do a lot more work to get the same points up front. They, probably less work ongoing, but up front there's less for them to do. But they probably still might do it because they can.
So just to summarize it, the concern is that the project-based voucher points could be inadvertently advantaging housing authorities with a development arm.
And big developers that.
And the big developers that already partner with them.
Yeah.
Okay. And at the disadvantage of the smaller nonprofits, that 811 is available to everyone, but it's not particularly, it's not an annually replenishing source. It depends on whenever the feds put out.
I think we have an annual allocation. Some developers do not want, so that is up to everybody, right? It has their own regulations and the all things, but everybody could apply for those.
Okay.
So
If that's the case, what if we just did the 811 as the
that's what I was,
Oh,
that's what I was saying,
okay.
just use the A11.
Okay.
Because that everybody is open to
Right.
it, can apply for it.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying.
All right.
Mark,
so we'll
does
take
that
out
address
the,
what you were kind of talking about, or did you have a different, I want to make sure that we don't just jump there.
I mean, does that address the question about whether it's unfairly incentivizing or advantaging the housing authorities to include the project-based voucher section?
Well, Mark made a point, and I wanted to make sure I connected the two,
Oh, yes.
So I was trying to make sure we didn't miss something, or that I didn't miss something.
It is, so Mark's point, if I can rephrase it, was that the project-based voucher application process is a lot more involved potentially than the 811, because 811 is simply having the state say, yes, we're interested in your project. It's not so much of they don't have to rewrite an admin plan or go out with an RFP or do any of those other things that the housing authority would have to do before they could even commit something to a development.
Indeed. And the other, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert on Section 8, I understand it, the administrator is supposed to hold something of a competition itself to determine which entity receives the project basing of the vouchers. Now, I don't think those competitions are really of ever much doubt or consequence, but I think that's a step in the process that has to occur. And so I think you could, the only wrinkle, and I hate to add a wrinkle but it feels like I should let you know, the challenge, if you were to say, if you'd only make this 811, the one hole in that would be if a property was 100% rent assisted. And that's pretty rare in the new construction context, but it could happen. And if it did, then that property actually wouldn't be able to get these points at all, because you can't have rent assistance on the two different kinds of rent assistance on the same unit. So that would be, now maybe that's sufficiently rare that you don't need to worry about it. But
so Mark, the couple of things, I mean, we are a housing authority. The state is the statewide housing authority. So we do have to do a comp plan anyway. regardless, I mean, for their vouchers, they do have to do the annual comp plan. But if a project comes in with 100% Section 8 vouchers, probably they have a lot of point on the finance piece because they have a lot of money. I mean, a project 100% voucher really makes a 4% a perfect project. And we have several projects right now with project-based vouchers that are 4%, and the state is putting some subsidy in, and they're pretty significant developments in Hartford. So I'm not worried about a project with Section 8 vouchers. They're gonna make their points and they're gonna make their way. And just more about the opportunity for those that cannot compete for project-based and equal footing with like the Section 8 that is for everybody, right? Whoever wants to apply can apply.
With the 811, isn't it the maximum income 30% of AMI?
So with 811, it's
then-
the federal disability program, right? It's the federal supportive housing. So it kind of mirrors ours, or vice versa.
Yeah, but I think if your income can't exceed 30% of the AMI, then is that actually getting at the scenario that you were talking about, Terry, where people don't qualify for the 30% unit, but the 50% is too expensive?
Mhm.
And if you're talking about giving points to people who, because you're already getting a lot of points for having units at 30% of the AMI anyway. So it's sort of double
Yeah, every
double
time
dipping there.
double dipping. Every time I'm thinking about this, I think these points are kind of double dipping because you have housing vouchers, so you can put it into your 25%, 30%,
Right,
and then you're
right.
gonna come here. Probably this is double dipping.
Right,
points.
right, right.
Okay.
That's probably the best way to put it in, Kathy.
We could put the other option, if we didn't put the 811 in for points, is to put them in the guideline. The preference to putting it in for points, and they don't have to be as rich either, but the preference for putting them in as points was simply to make sure that they were going, that it was project-based vouchers. They could go through the guideline in a different way entirely, and we could just encourage the supportive housing component up at the top, which is really the 811, was part of the 811. So if we were back up to, has been discussion about increasing the points for the supportive housing if you're doing specific populations, like maybe you get 10 points if you're doing chronically homeless, and you get 8 if you're doing, I don't know, the autism spectrum or the IDDD population, and DCF families, and 6 points if you're doing money follows the person, or something that already comes with services would have less points than something that does not.
So I don't like to put things in buckets because it complicates, and it complicates the management and the development when you don't have that person for that specific category, then you suffer. I have been there and I will be suffering for that. Like,
Right.
just to complicate it. So I would think that if we, I mean, really, I think that I'm with Kathy, that maybe this is just, you can take this one out from here because it's just not making a difference.
Okay.
And people can apply for the A11. And I think we need to get a little more, I will need to get a little more information because, as Kathy said, one of the things why when I was on the other side, I didn't pursue the A11 was because it wasn't that much subsidy compared with the requirements. And I think that's why people weren't applying for it. So I will take a look at that.
Okay. All right. So for this rental affordability section, then taking out the project-based voucher, which was potentially 4 points, taking out the, and moving essentially the language that was related to equity in housing. That's what, 6 points. That brings us back to a level of prioritizing that's not really what we want. So we would,
Terry,
yes.
why don't you look at cutting back sustainability points
So I was just going to
pro
mention,
rata across the board so that it's more in line with where it should be in terms of its importance with affordability. Because,
Mhm.
you know, we worked with the group on sustainability measures and we don't want to take away from that work. On the other hand, it has to work within our priorities. And so if we have to re-level it with where everything else is, I don't think that's unreasonable.
right? I think that's a good way to look at it, because
Yeah.
if we take out, you know, the 6 points here and we're looking for 6 points more, it becomes, you know, yeah, we're tripping over ourselves. So better to go back and look at the sustainability and reduce those points. Okay.
I think you can explain it by saying that you're not changing its importance in terms of where where it would fall within the weighting of the overall QAP, right? Because I mean,
Right. Right. Perfect. That makes sense. Okay. Out of rental affordability, then the next points section really occurs at local impact and design. And that's all the sustainability I'm going to look at, but, you know, to reduce it equitably. But this local impact section has a new category that talks about, I think it's on the next page, that talks about concerted community revitalization plans and proximity to amenities under TOD. So there's 2 different things that we've done. The TOD, we talked a little bit about last time that we were trying to recognize that mixed use just doesn't work, and we're taking that out. But we did want to recognize that the development should be close to services and amenities that would be valuable in the development. So we have private amenities, public amenities. We've provided some definitions of what that might be. And it's the same point structure, it's just a different, you know, point for point. It's the same as it was before, but it just takes out the mixed use. And then what I really wanted to get at was the community revitalization, which I think is on the next page.
so are we saying we don't care about mixed use, or are we defining differently?
It just doesn't work. I think
Okay.
in since we've had it, every application that brings in mixed use, it's a struggle. I mean, the commercial components, really we can't underwrite them, and they're not always successful. Then there's some question about what they are. Some people want to just use their own developments office space as the mixed use component. As we originally envisioned, it would be a place to put like a neighborhood market or a pharmacy or you know, some local service, or, you know, a little museum, a little art center, something that would keep feet on the street, but it just wasn't working through the LIHTC program.
So Terry, you're not saying you cannot do it, you're just not giving points, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So somebody can still present just the housing piece of the retail, but you're just not giving points for that.
Right. They could present their whole deal, and maybe the ground floor does have commercial space because that's required by zoning. We don't underwrite to it. It may be a component of the development, and the what do you call the structure? The structural component is funded, but not the fit out. That's the commercial piece of it. And we just aren't providing the point like we used to do. You could still come in with it, but it's not incentivized.
Just before we leave transit, could we just
Oh,
we-
Lisa, I'm sorry. Thank
No,
you.
that's okay. Just to put a pin in the fact that we would like to find in some way some language that respects the existing state statute, which has largely been the basis of transit as defined here, but not, well, rather broaden that to include transit in neighboring states if it fits within the definition, right? So if you're looking at a TOD development, but the transit is, you know, in New York because you're right on the border, or the transit is in Rhode Island because you're right on the border. We don't want that to be excluded as long as it meets the same definition. If we can think about that, that would be terrific.
Okay.
And then on the proximity to amenities, should that proximity be defined? So how would you score that? So if you have a project that has, you know, lots of public amenities within 8 miles versus one that has lots of amenities within 1 mile. I mean, is it, does one get the points and the other doesn't, or how? It just feels like there should be some sort of, you know, proximity within 2 miles, or I don't know, you know, pick a number, but
Okay.
I don't know how you score that if you don't have a definition of proximity.
How
And-
much could you walk, Kathy?
Well, if it was you, Salem, I mean, that could be 10 miles, right? Being the runner that you are. Some of us couch potatoes, that might be more difficult. But
No. There are some states that have quite a bit of language around proximity, mapping tools, you know, in the interest of keeping it simple, we hadn't expanded it, but you're right, it would make more sense and be clearer for developers if we had
Yeah.
exact distance. So it might be worth a little research to see what that actually might mean.
Yeah.
We'll put in.
yeah, well,
some-
I'm just thinking too of somebody reviewing the application. How
Mhm.
would you know to award the points?
Right,
You know?
yeah. I'm trying to think, I think there was one state that actually listed, you know, they took all the developments, they listed how close they were, and the points went to the ones that were closest. So it was, I don't want to say arbitrary, but it was kind of
Mhm.
intensive. You had to look at all the developments, and it was almost like we do when we say, if you're the 2 lowest cost developments in your soft costs, you're going to get a point. It was kind of like that. It
Yeah.
was, they say, you know, we're going to look at all the developments, and the 2 that have the closest proximity to amenities are the ones that get the points, that kind of thing.
I think you may be referencing Kansas
Hmm,
and
okay, yeah.
the way that works. It's my favorite QAP because I got to write it from scratch. It was a lot of fun. The one that's the closest to the most amenities gets the most points, and then the second closest to the next most amenities gets the second amount of points. And so it's all relative. It's all comparative, and so. And there's a defined way that those measurements occur. So they haven't gone through it yet because it's a brand new policy, but I'm optimistic that it'll work out really well. But it is very defined and prescriptive. It's not. There's no general, including they don't say full service groceries. They say, you know, Kroger and Food Lion and you know, Wegmans, you know, they actually spell out the ones that are eligible. So it's a very different approach that requires a lot more drafting, but it can work.
Mark, is it incumbent on the applicant, or is it staff work done by the authority to assign the points?
So
Do they come in and say, here's what the points we think we're owed based on this?
exactly. Yep. They generate PDFs of the Google Maps showing it, and then staff checks those to the extent that they have the time and capacity, either themselves going by Google or actually driving out. In North Carolina, they drive out. The North Carolina has a similar system. They drive out to their properties, and invariably, when you have that as many, they'll have 150 apps in North Carolina. So invariably, there'll be at least a few where they said they were close to a pharmacy, but nope, they were not. Or they say they're within a mile, but really, nope, 1.1 miles. And so that actually does happen once you get that number. And so then they don't get the points that they think they were going to get. But there's really no right or best way to do this. It's just a choice, and it's largely about what the staff has the capacity and time to do during the application review process.
Okay. Is there any further discussion on the TOD and this proximity?
Terry, do we have then a proposal? I'm sorry if I missed
I
it.
think
as
so.
to-
I like your language. I was writing it as you spoke, and I think what makes sense then is to reframe this. So when this comes back out around in a day or so with the changes that are proposed, you'll be able to see and comment and say that's what we're talking about or not. But it sounds like we want to be able to include transit stations that are comparable to what's required in the existing statute, but that may be across over the state border, whichever state border it is. So,
That's perfect. And did we have an idea then to resolve the question that Kathy raised about better definition, at least for this iteration? I mean, it sounds like, Mark, what you described, that sounds really promising, but we probably don't have time to put that together this time. And we'll have a couple years of their experience when we start to look at this next time to see what they learned. But if there's I wonder, Mark, if there's a way you've seen others, if there's a more scaled down approach we could use here that you might suggest.
I think there certainly could be. Yep. And I don't know that I should try to characterize it on the fly here, but I do think it'd be very possible to revise this a little bit further without taking too much time.
it might be worth looking at just in the context of who got TOD points in the past and how close are they to certain things. That might give us an idea just in general of do we want to suggest 2 miles, 5 miles, or do we want to say the top, whatever it is, handful, say out of the top 5, there's a scale of points, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, something like that.
Don't you have that in the opportunities where you have like, I don't remember whether you guys still have the distance like half a mile if you are close to the train station or the park,
Yes.
like that.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
part of that, right?
Yeah, it shouldn't be that difficult to really just assign a mileage, but sometimes you get pushback from developers who will say, but you could walk over there, but depends on who's walking, so just to your point, I think, what do we have? We have up at the top here. Pedestrian's path. And we refer to the distance to the station. So I don't know that we've called out exactly what it is, but it says within a half a mile of an existing station or hub. So that's for transit. We could do the same thing. Your choice if you want to say, if maybe you or Kathy already have a sense of what that means for distance.
Yeah, I mean, half a mile seems pretty small. I mean,
Pretty tight for all these amenities, right?
yeah. I would say, maybe 1 or 2 miles. I mean, that if you had to walk someplace, you could. I mean, or it would at least be a cheap Uber ride, I guess.
Yeah, okay.
My only, John Cabral, my only suggestion is you may want to have sort of like walking or driving distance, just because, for example, if you live on one side of the Connecticut River, like you live in Rocky Hill and you don't have the ferry going, and there's an amenity right across the river in Glastonbury, it may take you 7 miles, 10 miles to get to that amenity, even though it is literally across the river. So by the crow flies, it's
Sure.
within a half a mile, but to get there, it may take a lot longer. So
Sure.
we saw that with transit. So we had folks who were like, well, we're near a transit hub and it's right across the river, but to get to that transit hub, you're either going to swim across the river or you're going to have to drive 5 miles. So
Yeah. The notion of crow flies gets less and less logical as the distance gets further and further. If it's a very small radius, that can make sense because you have that much less of the likelihood of those sorts of circumstances. And I think a lot of QAPs had that straight line distance measurement from the days before anyone who was able to use internet could generate these Google Maps. But
exactly.
those are now just so easy. Just put a pin in point A, put a pin in point B, and it draws the line for you. And really, that's all. So that, I don't think, again, unless it's like in measurement, maybe even in yards, I don't think you really need to use crow flies. I think it's better to do the driving distance.
Okay.
Can I ask a
And-
question? Oh, sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
Now, does transit have to be just a half a mile? Because that always felt pretty short, for train stations and that kind of thing.
I think the thought process was that you're going to not use a car to get to a transit station.
Yeah.
It was the walking distance. So half a mile, I think, equals a 10-minute walk, I think, or something. I forgot
Yeah.
the equation. But I think that was the thought process. And most TOD I've seen always has this half mile walking radius thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
My
I
question.
mean, it's not very long walk, I guess. And
Unless you're carrying a baby and groceries and everything
True.
else. So.
True.
Does it make sense to prescribe the distance, right? Like Kathy and Sailor were saying, like 2 miles or whatever that number is, but still give the points based on rank order. So in other words, you set some sort of limit for what you
Parameters.
consider close, right? So whether it's maybe you err on the higher side because maybe, I don't know. So I'm just thinking out loud. So forgive me here, but let's say it's 2 or 3 miles. And then if somebody is really close or within a mile, then they get the higher number of points. And then the further out you go, I mean, there's only 2 points here,
Mhm.
but maybe you don't give everybody 2 points that's within 3 miles because it would seem unfair, because if you're really close, maybe you get all the points. Whereas if you're within 2 miles, then you get only 1 point. I don't know.
So, and what we're trying to, I mean, I think that can be a good solution, but I want to go back to what's the goal? Do we want people to walk, or do they want amenities that they can drive, or they can have an opportunity to take a Uber? I mean, what's the goal that we want to accomplish, right? Because if we said, oh, well, we want to make sure that people can walk to amenities, that there is a park, that is a grocery store. So then whoever is going to be closer to that with the walking distance, as Kathy said, maybe is a mile that somebody can go. And that can be, I don't know, a lady with a baby and groceries, or a man, a father with a baby and bags
I'm
of
not walking a
grocery.
mile and take my kid to a park.
Yeah, not just a lady. That's what I refrain myself. You do grocery too, right, Tim? Walking with the 2 bags. So I think that if we can agree to what is that we want to accomplish, and then you say, okay, whoever is closer to it, just get the points. And I think that that's what the purpose is, for people to be able to walk,
Mhm.
right? So how far can you walk?
Right.
So the first part, very definitely, you need to be able to walk to the station. So you could take a bus or a train to get wherever else you want to go, or connections to wherever else you want to go. The second part was more about quality of life and having access. So whether that means you're going to walk there, or you can drive there, or you can take the bus there, there just was a desire to have things nearby. So we have a lot of communities in the state where you have to get in the car and get on the highway and drive a couple of exits before you're at the grocery store. And that's not entirely convenient. And that's a little different than getting in the car and driving just a little bit across town. And maybe it's a mile and a half, 2 miles to get to the grocery store. And then you can accomplish your other errands all in that same kind of 2-mile circle, you know? So I think there was 2 different components to this TOD. The first part, having the half-mile measure, I think is totally appropriate, because you're walking to get to other connections. The second part, you really need to broaden it a little bit. And I don't know that we could expect people to walk really much more than a half a mile to accomplish certain objectives. I mean, if you're going for recreation, that's one thing, but if you're going to do errands, it's not likely you're going to walk there. So we might want to just establish 2 miles, and for that piece of it, proximity to amenities, driving within 2 miles or something like that. And if we wanted to say, you know, if it's within 2 miles, you have 1 point, 2 points. If it's within 5 miles, you get 1 point, and we combine private and public amenities. We still are within the same point thing, but we recognize distance. That might be a way to get to it.
Yeah.
We have about 10 minutes left, and I really wanted to just get to the concerted community revitalization plan piece, because that's also new language and an important component. So, and it's 3 points. So I wanted to be sure that people were comfortable with this as well. And it's something that's always been a part of the QCT language, but it's also something that gets to recognizing efforts that communities are making to improve their neighborhoods and their communities. And to Salah's point earlier, community revitalization plans can be developed not only by the municipality or the city, but could be developed by the neighborhood revitalization zone planners, or the COGS, or perhaps a foundation or an organization that's been developed just for that purpose, like such as in Litchfield. So there are some components. I don't know if, let me see if I can see it. Okay, thanks, Masuda. I'm so bad. 3 points would be awarded to proposed developments that are part of a concerted community revitalization plan. And we list the few things that the components of which should be included. And we also define neighborhood revitalization zone in the glossary, so that it's, you know, it's not limiting that work to a municipality. There should be, and we want to make sure we're not saying municipality, anyone here. And maybe local government needs to be broadened a little bit, but in accordance with our earlier conversation. But we're suggesting that, you know, by the time they've applied with a preliminary application for a QA for the 9%, a local plan should have been adopted with a concerted community revitalization component that defines the specific area of the work, and that development should be within that area. And there should be other activities that would be occurring besides the residential component. Maybe it's a library, a school, or a park, or something else that is going to be improved in that community. The proposed development would contribute to one or more of the revitalization plan stated goals. And this is talking about the local government having made or having committed to making specific investments in the non-housing infrastructure beyond the development. So this language, I don't know, Commissioner, you mentioned earlier that we shouldn't be restricting things to local government.
Yeah,
So this language would need to be tweaked a little bit and broadened so that it doesn't just say local government. But as a concept for concerted community revitalization plan, what are your thoughts? Do you think this meets it? Do we need to add more, take something out?
Well, and maybe while we wait on that answer, I'll just say the logic behind limiting it to local governments is not because of presuming they have the only value to add in this context. They certainly don't, but they are a discrete, definable group. You know exactly who they are. And once you open the point scoring possibilities to not local governments, it then becomes the question of how do you define who those not local governments are? And that's very possible. It's certainly possible to do. It just requires the additional thinking because to take the ridiculous extreme, you wouldn't want to let the developer, the for-profit developer that's not even based in Connecticut, just write something up and turn it in. That'd be ridiculous. But unless you define that away, then they technically could. And so you need to have some way of making sure that other parties' role is legitimate and real. So it just would require words to define that. But again, those words are possible.
yeah, I think, thank you, Mark, for that. And to Terry's point, I mean, there are like the NRCs that are residents driven by some, LISC is working in many different organizations. So you can put those examples in there so that it's not just any plan. It has to be a plan in conjunction with one of those entities.
Okay.
Kathy, you have any, I mean, I think that covers, once you tweak the language, that not just the government. As I said, sometimes the neighborhoods do their own implementation and planning without the city certifying that. But I don't know, Kathy, do you have any other ideas?
Yeah, I think the NRZ, I think works because the NRZ is defined by statute too. So, because you wouldn't just want it, Kathy's neighborhood builders plan, right?
Yeah,
right.
Be self-serving, but yeah, I mean, it would have to be some sort of established, municipally recognized group, I guess, even if the municipality doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, that's a good way to get a municipal recognized group instead of having the municipality certification.
Yeah.
I mean, it can happen many times. Some of the municipalities do, but there are some other ones that sometimes do not participate.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you just want to be able to actually define what that group is. So, I mean, the NRZs are defined. I don't know if there are other planning groups, that would. What about like the CROGs of the world too?
Yeah, those are two, because they're working on some of the planning with some of the towns and cities.
Yeah.
Would we want to say municipal or state government recognized just to cover that?
Okay. That works. Yeah. Okay. Are there any other thoughts on that? One last point for discussion. Under opportunity areas, and I'm only racing to this because we have 4 minutes left and I want to make sure we have some agreement. Under opportunity areas, we've assigned points, and then there was the concern raised by a couple of developers who had applied previously, were not successful, but do intend to reapply, that they won't get as many points under the opportunity area if they do in fact apply. One development that comes to mind was in a high opportunity area previously, will now be in a low opportunity area because it's the census tract that drives the score now, not the town. So having said that, there was a thought that we could potentially evaluate applications that reapply who were unsuccessful in the 2019 or 2020 rounds, didn't receive an award then, but are reapplying now. Permit them to be sort of grandfathered in with the 2020 QAP. Is that anything you would like to consider? Is that something you just want to say, yay or nay to? Or any conversation you have on it or any thoughts would be great.
I'm in favor of that. I just have two questions, Terry. I think we also discussed whether or not that grandfathering would be for 1 year or 2. And I don't know if we came to conclusion on that. And then the additional point we discussed was whether or not if a development submits for phase 2, if it were always planned for a multiple phase development, would we use the point score from the original development? And I just don't know if we've come to closure on those two issues.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I think my original thought on that, if someone were to ask me, would be nay. But only because I don't know. I don't know the impact of grandfathering someone. Is there going to be some other group that says, well, hell, you grandfathered them in because it impacted them this way, but I didn't get an award, and therefore, if I were to apply under this, I would get higher, or if I applied under the other way, or would get lower or higher, and so I just think of the unintended consequences of grandfathering someone in. I won't vote against it, but I just think it's something we should think about if there's going to be some other group that comes up and says, well, why do they get, the treatment, but we don't?
Yeah, because I'm thinking that's a good point, Tim, because I might decide not to, I didn't apply, but I was working towards, I didn't make the deadline. I'm going to apply now, and I'm going to want to be grandfathered in from, if you're going to grandfather anybody, right?
And there are other things that have changed too. So what if you designed a project with certain sustainability requirements that now you don't get the same points for that either?
Yeah, that's a good point too.
Or what if you get more points for something else? Do you give those up if you want to be grandfathered? Do you know what I mean? I feel like you
But
either.
Kathy, wouldn't that be the idea? You could either, if we were going to grandfather, you either take your old score or you take your new score, right? And you don't pick and choose.
Yeah.
And for a limited period of time, if in fact we believe that the shift of point score, I think the reason we started discussing this is that there are a lot of investments that developers make to put the proposal together, right?
Right.
So to allow for a sort of transition period to the new points. But I think, Kathy, to your point, it's totally fair to say you get A or B. You cannot, it's not like a Chinese food menu, right? Where you can pick this or that and put it together.
And are the same total, is it the same total points?
No.
So, so, what might have, gotten 65 points in the last round and gotten awarded, now you have to have at least 70, given that, it just feels like you're opening yourself up to
total points. Isn't it 9 plus 6, 15 maximum? Hasn't changed, right?
Right. In this category, I think I thought the question was if in the entire, if you were going to mix and match, it's actually 2020 or 2021 or, whatever it is. But in all fairness, there's only one development that's likely to reapply that's impacted. So I wonder if a better way to address it is specifically working with that development to make sure that they're successful.
Yeah,
I think so too. I mean, you can direct policy based on one development because then you have other. I mean, it's just not fair to anybody else. So I'd rather look at ways that we could work as we're trying to work with many other developers to see where are they and how we can help them.
Okay. All right, good. That takes care of that. All right, we are just at 12. Is there any final thoughts or comments before we end? I so appreciate your 2-hour commitment to this today. Really.
Appreciate all your work, Terry.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah, great job.
Yeah, thank you,
Terry.
Terry. Great job as always, and very complicated issues here. So
Yeah.
thank you, and thanks to Mark too for the additional support this year.
Thanks, Mark.
Yes.
Terry, can you
Right.
just quickly talk about next steps before we convene?
Yes. So the next thing we will do is take the comments that we've just received, incorporate them into the red line, kind of make it a little bit easier for you to see what the new changes are, and then send that out to you quickly so that you could have, sort of confirm that we've captured everything. Because ideally, we'd like to bring that confirmed red line to the board at the end of the month to have authorization of a public comment period in May. Generally, we need just to do a hearing, but we'd like to have a comment period so people have more time to, express their views. And then we're also working on a pre-application process that may be used in conjunction with this round. So we'd like to be able to share that with you at the board meeting as well. So everybody be okay if we just send around the draft again for a quick look and then kind of confirm that your understanding is fine and we go to the board for the public comment period?
Yes.
Great. Okay. That's that then. Thank
Awesome.
you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
so
everyone.
much.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.